Let's bring in a friend of this program for a long time, a reporter who can put the noise and fury of this campaign in context. Dan Balz, chief correspondent for the Washington Post. He joins us from Columbia, South Carolina. Dan, you covered your first Democratic convention in 1968 when protesters clashed with Chicago police over the Vietnam War and civil rights. Over 50 years later, when you step back, are Democrats now facing a similar inflection point as Senator Sanders and his wing clashes with the establishment?
Well, I think these are separable issues, Bob. No question that 68 was a terrible moment for the Democratic Party, but a very, very difficult moment for the entire country because of the assassinations and the anti-war protests, which were beyond the Democratic Party. And that's what 68 was really all about. What we have now broadly, not just within the Democratic Party, is the deepest polarization that any of us can remember as the parties have kind of become homogenized. And this has become worse under President Trump, who has helped to kind of stoke these divisions. And I think they have become more intense and more passionate on each side. What the Democrats are going through is a very important struggle. It is not just establishment versus Bernie Sanders. It is a young versus older kind of conflict. It is people who are affected primarily, younger voters, by what happened in 2008 and the financial crisis, and older voters who have a different perspective on the kinds of things that Senator Sanders is talking about, particularly in the context of socialism. And that is a powerful argument that's playing out, and we're going to see it clash again on Super Tuesday, as we've seen it in some of these early primaries. It's too early to say exactly where things are going to end up, but there's no question that right now Senator Sanders has an advantage, and the hope of the establishment wing of the party is, as Peter was saying, that there will be consolidation after Super Tuesday, and that this becomes a one-on-one contest. But even in that, Bernie Sanders might have the advantage.
Yamiche, are we living in a populist time? Dan talked about polarization. You covered Senator Sanders closely in 2016 and again in 2020. We started this program talking about President Trump, Senator Sanders, both populists, perhaps.
That question makes me think of a voter that I talked to in South Carolina. He's someone who is a Joe Biden supporter, but he admitted that he's very, very worried because he says Bernie Sanders has his hand on the pulse of America and he's reading it very well. And he says that he thinks that people want change. They see President Trump, they see him doing what he wants to do, they see Republicans backing him, and that has pushed a lot of people, including Democrats, farther to the left, saying, well, why don't we just demand what we want on the left instead of being moderates, instead of wanting to tweak systems? So I think Bernie Sanders has this feeling of a populist, and it would be interesting to see both President Trump and Bernie Sanders use their idea of what populism is on their side to make a case.
Dan, when you look at the left, and Senator Sanders is a democratic socialist, that's how he describes his politics, are we looking at a new left or a return to an old left, a Franklin Delano Roosevelt style Democrat?
Well, one could say that the kinds of things that Sanders is talking about are old Democratic or New Deal kinds of policies, a much bigger role for government to deal with these things. But we're in a different period right now. I mean, obviously, Roosevelt came in during the Depression and had to battle through that. What Senator Sanders is talking about really is at root the vast gulf between the wealthiest and the rest of the country. And he has put his finger on that as a fundamental core issue that is not being dealt with by the political system. And so the solutions he's promoting are, in fact, much more government intervention, much costlier kinds of government spending. But the diagnosis is one that rings true with a lot of people, and I suspect with a lot of people who were attracted to Donald Trump in 2016, that in one way or another, the system that we have is not working for the vast majority of the people.
Peter, when you think about Vice President Biden coming out of South Carolina, should he win there, where will the moderates go? Toward Bloomberg, toward Biden, or will it just be muddled in this long slog toward Milwaukee?
Yeah, that's the big question right now. I think had Bloomberg done better in those two debates that he had, he might have been a more viable alternative for knocking Biden off. But suddenly Biden, who looked very weak in those first two contests, finishing, deep down in the fourths and fifths kind of range, suddenly had a kind of a comeback, right? Some of the establishment said, okay, well, we're not thrilled about how well he's done, but maybe this Bloomberg thing isn't going to work. Let's go back to plan A, and Biden was plan A. So it's a big question. But Bloomberg has the resources that Biden doesn't. He doesn't have the party ties that Biden does, right? I mean, he's not really a Democrat. If it's Bloomberg versus Sanders, as Pete Buttigieg says, you're talking about two people, one of whom still doesn't consider himself a Democrat, and the other one only recently became a Democrat. What a transformation of this party.
Dan, who could bring together the Democrats? Is it President Obama? Who could actually, if it goes to Milwaukee without a clear picture of who the nominee is going to be, who actually stitches together the Democratic Party?
Bob, that's a question that everybody is asking right now. I think that there is a sense that it is not likely to be President Obama because that's not in his nature. I think Harry Reid, the former Senate Majority Leader from Nevada, recently said to our colleague Paul Kane that he did not think that that was the kind of thing that Barack Obama would undertake if it goes to a contested convention. And as others have said, I think we're a little way from knowing about that. I think a lot of people would look to Speaker Pelosi. She has been the strongest force within the Democratic Party since they took the majority back in 2018. And I think that she would be pressed to play some kind of a role. But exactly what that would be and who else would be involved, it's too early to know that.
Dan, quickly, what's the state you're looking at in terms of Super Tuesday? What's the place on the map that matters to you as a reporter?
Well, I think California, for all the reasons that you all were talking about earlier, it has 415 delegates, 53 congressional districts that will award the majority of the delegates. At this point, only Bernie Sanders is broadly viable in all of those districts. Everybody else may be on the cusp of viability, but not necessarily viable. How that shakes out, and frankly, we're not going to know perhaps for another week or 10 days after Super Tuesday because of the way they count the votes in California. But that's going to be the ultimate crucial state in terms of knowing what kind of a lead Senator Sanders has after Super Tuesday and whether it is possible to overtake him.